right. So as previously mentioned, this is our Criminal Justice Advocacy Day. So welcome, welcome. We are going to start with our skill building portion of the training. Each one of our days will start with some skill building and then get into the issue topic of the day. If you have any questions as we go, don't hesitate to drop those in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that this whole time, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So today, our skill building portion is talking about communicating effectively with legislators. So as you know, Empower Missouri is a nonpartisan organization. We are thrilled to work with legislators across both sides of the aisle. As we always say, poverty is a nonpartisan issue. You are hard-pressed to find a single legislator in the state of Missouri who does not have people who are living in poverty in their district. And so I think that, as we prepare ourselves as advocates to go into the Capitol and have conversations with legislators, we need to remember that we are going to be working with legislators from both sides of the aisle who may or may not share some of our core beliefs on key issues. So I don't know about you all, but way back in the day, pre-COVID, when I used to go to the nail salon and get my nails done as a little bit of a guilty pleasure, that would be the only time that I would pick up magazines like People or, whatever the other like gossip kind of magazines are. And they at least used to have a section in there called Celebrities Are Just Like Us. And they would include these really funny photos of celebrities pumping gas and buying groceries and playing with their children. And I always got such a kick out of that section because I just thought, of course, they're like us. They're just people. And so are legislators. Legislators are just people, just like you and I. They all have careers. They did something else before they came to the legislature. And because Missouri's legislature is part-time and only works for 5 months out of the year, the vast majority of them are still working in another job. They have families, whether that be a spouse and children or brothers and sisters and parents. They have people in their lives that they care about. They have interests and passions. They belong to faith communities. They might play recreational sports. They have things that maybe their passion is the reason why they ran for the legislature to begin with. And so I think that it is really important to remember that, because I think a lot of times for new advocates especially, but it even happens to folks like me from time to time who, talk to legislators every day, you can sometimes get a little intimidated. And so I think the best thing that you can do when you have that moment of intimidation is to remember that legislators are just like us, and to know that that intimidation is always going to be lessened if you do your research in advance. So if you are preparing to talk to your legislator for the first time, or if you know that you're going to be reaching out to a legislator that you have not talked to before, maybe there is a bill that is filed that you either really like or really don't like, and you want to reach out to the sponsor of the legislation itself, but you've never talked to that person before, I would strongly advise you to look them up first. Google is an excellent tool. You can find a lot of information on folks by really just like finding their campaign website. If these folks are elected officials, that means that they have run for office at least once. Some of them have run many times for office over the years. And you can find lots of information, especially biographical stuff, on their campaign website. I would check out their social media accounts. Facebook and Twitter, Instagram even. I don't know if we have any Missouri legislators on TikTok, but if we do, check that out too. Their LinkedIn page. Look and see what sort of content are they sharing? What are they talking about? That will often give you a lot of clues to what their passions are. If you do a Google search and then you click on the news tab at the top of a Google search, you will likely find many news articles that reference that legislator, either in big statewide papers or even in their local papers. And you can see, a lot of legislators in Missouri write a column for their paper. So that's a great way to learn a little bit about, what they're thinking about, what they care about. And you're certainly likely to find them quoted in many articles about events of the moment since they've been in office. So definitely check that out. And then take a look at their Missouri legislator profile. And I'm going to show you an example of one of those on the next slide here. But the most important thing, I think, as you are doing this research and getting to know this person is to really find some common ground, especially if this is a person who maybe doesn't share your party affiliation, or there's someone who you are going to talk to and you are going to tell them that you oppose a piece of their legislation or that you oppose a piece of legislation that you know that they like. It's really important to not walk in and immediately sort of start on that negative note. Like we said in the previous slide, legislators are just like us and they don't like that, and neither would we, right? Like imagine that you are dealing with a tricky situation at work and you've made a decision and someone, comes to your office door and without any sort of like conversation or niceties is just immediately like, oh, that change that you made to this policy, I hate it. And here's why it's terrible. And here's why it's bad for me. It's a really off-putting way to start a conversation. And so really having that common ground from the beginning, starting with those conversations about things that you have in common, really do open people up to hear what you have to say, especially, like I said, if you are going to be taking an oppositional stance to them. So this is an example of a profile that is on the Missouri House website. And I see many of my colleagues here from Empower on the phone. I'm hoping that one of them will drop in the chat for me a link to the Missouri House of Representatives website. And the Senate website is the same, right? When you go into either the House or Senate website, you will find a profile page on each and every one of the people who are our current Missouri legislators. So I think that it is, Sarah, thanks so much for dropping that in the chat. When we look here, so I chose Representative Ron Hicks because he is the sponsor of one of the bills that we are going to be supporting today on the criminal justice call. So when I go to Ron's page, there's a number of things that I can see from the beginning. Here in sort of the main information spot, I can see the district that he represents. I can see his political party. I can see the original year that he was elected and how long he's been in the House. So Ron is actually in his final year of the House of Representatives. He is termed out after this year. I can see his hometown and what counties that his district covers. And then I can also see a handy dandy little map here. So I can know exactly what Ron's district is. Then going over here down a little bit, I can see a list of all of the committees that Ron is serving on because Ron has been there for 8 years. He sits on a lot of committees. You'll find that the newer legislators typically only serve on 2 or 3 committees, but that over time, they tend to serve on more. This is a screenshot, so it's cut off here, but you can also always find their address in the Capitol. So if you do want to write your legislator an old-fashioned letter, you can absolutely do that. I think these addresses are really helpful too. One of the things that we'll talk about throughout the week is the importance of following up with legislators. And so it's always a great idea to send a thank you note, whether you do that via email. I personally love a good handwritten thank you note. I think that they tend to really stand out. So I think that it is great to be able to pop onto this page and pull their exact address. Each of the pages also then has a biography. And so you can read a little bit about them, where they serve, their background, their career, things like that. And then over here on the right, you can get a list of all of the bills that they have sponsored this session. And so you can click in, and again, I can't do this because it's a screenshot, but you can also see, so this first grouping of bills are bills that the person is the lead sponsor on. The second portion of bills are bills that they have co-sponsored. So someone else is the lead sponsor, but they have added their name to that list. And then the final tab is for amendments. So if there are bills that are being debated, legislators can choose to add an amendment to those bills. You can see a list of all the bills that that person has suggested amendments to and their amendment legislation. And then for some folks here at the top too, if you want to follow this person a little bit more closely, for example, if they are your representative and you want to know what they're doing, some of them, not all of them, have buttons where you can sign up for their capital report, as well as for the, some of them do a district publication as well. So it's a really good idea to get on folks' email lists and follow the work that they are doing throughout legislative session. So then once you are in the meeting, you want to introduce yourself and state why you are there. It's good to sort of, be upfront about the purpose of the meeting. A lot of times, especially if you're meeting with folks during legislative session, they're busy and they want to know like what the topic of the meeting is. If you are sometimes in a meeting, especially like tomorrow, we'll be sending advocates in to speak with their own representative and their own senator to talk on a variety of topics. And so if there are things that you are in a single conversation going to be advocating for and against, we would always recommend that you start with the thing that you're advocating for. So again, we want to be really positive as much as possible at the beginning to sort of set the tone for the entire conversation. And if you're only advocating against something, as I said previously, try to, start with a little small talk, find some common ground. Maybe there's another piece of legislation that they like that's doing really well, that you want to say, hey, I saw that you filed this bill, by the way, thanks so much, really excited to see that that is, moving through the process. Maybe they attend the same church as you, or the same family of churches as you. They're a Methodist, you're a Methodist. Somebody in their parish. Oh, I've heard really great things about, your volunteer work in this community from this person. Or maybe you had a child, especially if you're talking to your own legislator in your own district, maybe your child went to the same school as their child. Like those are all the kind of things that you can sort of choose to start with. That way it sort of just softens things up in the conversation. Okay, and so I know that, like I said, for some folks, when you're going into these meetings, folks can feel a little nervous or apprehensive, and sometimes it's not enough to remember that legislators are just like us, even though they are. So I think that it's really helpful to sort of sketch out your talking points in advance. If I'm doing that, I like to handwrite my points. So I like to have a legal pad. It just helps me remember them better rather than typing something out and bringing it. I like to physically handwrite them out. I think most of us probably had to take a public speaking course in high school. So rather than writing down every single thing that you're going to say word for word, which people certainly don't really love if you walk into their office and then like read off of a piece of paper to them, you can build an outline. So think about, what you learned in high school or college, sort of like what are your main arguments that you want to make versus your supporting arguments. So, if they have a lot of questions about, one of your main argument, be ready to sort of back it up with supporting arguments. It's really great to have a couple of persuasive statistics. Those things often like stick in people's minds whenever we ask for Empower Missouri advocates to give a speech so sorry, to go and talk to a legislator. We try to provide you with those statistics so that you don't have to go and look them up on yourself. But certainly if it's something that you're just passionate about or that you're working on your own, grab a couple of those stats that have really moved you. They're likely going to move your legislator as well. And then really sort of like gauge your time, right? So, thinking about, are you having this meeting in an office or are you like grabbing a legislator in a hallway? Or has the legislator like invited you to come in and sit down? That tends to indicate to me that it's going to be a longer meeting and I can take a longer approach versus if it's sort of a quick, like they're just standing, we're talking maybe in the outer area of their office, I'm going to tend to go a little more quickly, or talking to a legislator versus their staff member. So a staffer, I would tend to give a little bit of a longer conversation to versus the legislator. And there's a great question in the chat from Karen. What if you're only meeting with their staff? Yeah, it's way harder to do advanced research on staff members. So on that profile page, it does typically tell you who that staff member is, but staff members, unlike legislators, don't have campaign pages. They're probably not going to be quoted in the media. And so you're not going to be able to sort of know them as well. But really do think about staff members as a representative of the legislator that they work for. And so, I think sort of the same thing applies where you don't want to just bust in and start talking about things that you hate about a bill. But, really treating them with a lot of courtesy and respect. These people have very hard jobs, managing the schedules and the all of the research for the folks that they work for. So, recognize that, thank them for all their hard work, ask them how long they've worked in the Capitol. A lot of them have really interesting stories. Some of them have been working for various legislators for 30 or 40 years. They know so much, and they're always so kind and so professional, and so are definitely going to be willing to take your information and pass it on to the legislator that they work for. And then make sure that you make it personal. So, the other thing is that statistics are really great and they will often stick in people's minds. But if you are going in and you're just sort of rattling off a bunch of statistics, that tends to be less impactful than if you can talk about why you care about the issue. And so, has the issue impacted you personally? Has it impacted someone that you know? Did you hear a story that really moved you? Can you share that story with someone else? Does your faith compel you to act? A lot of our legislators are very guided by their religious beliefs. And so that often resonates with them if, they hear other folks, talking about how their faith has compelled them to have a belief on this issue. Or if you're not religious, some other set of guiding principles or values that really make you believe and feel passionate about the issue. So adding, a sentence or two about why you care about this issue and why it matters does tend to make it then stick out in people's minds. And so leave an impression, right? So wrap up at the end with a strong summary of your argument, whether that's in writing or if you're talking to them in person. do be sure to thank them for their time. If you are meeting in person, leave a business card if you have one, or print materials. If you're going to be with us in the Capitol tomorrow, we'll have lots of print materials that you can leave behind. And then, like I said at the beginning, do send a thank you note or a follow-up email. And that's true if you're meeting with their staff as well. Don't think that just because you met with a staffer instead of a representative that you don't need to follow up with a thank you note or an email. Those folks will have business cards as well. So make sure that you get their cards so that you have an email address, or you can send a thank you note to the same address that the legislator is at. Any questions about building relationships with your legislator before we move on to our topic for the day? It's like keeping an eye on the chat, but also feel free to come off mute if you have a question. Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about two bills today that the Criminal Justice Coalition has been following. The first one is about the costs of phone calls in jails across the state. So we have a few statistics here that you can take notes on or internalize. So in the current moment across the country, the average cost for a 15-minute phone call that originates in a jail costs $5.74. So think about that for a second. Think about the fact that, on cell phones now we can make calls for an unlimited amount of time, and we're like no longer charging people per minute, right? That is not the case for phone systems in our jails and prisons. These folks absolutely are charged by the minute, whether it's a phone call or a video call. And Missouri has been, I think, probably unsurprisingly, one of the worst offenders in some certain parts of the state. So we added some information here about the current call cost for video chats in the Cape Girardeau County Jail and the Mountain County Jail, where they're charging almost $10 for a 15-minute call. So it's unsurprising then, I think, that one study found that more than a third of families who have incarcerated relatives were going into debt simply over the cost of staying in touch with their loved ones. And so, I think a lot of times at Empower Missouri, when people learn that we are an anti-poverty organization, first and foremost, they're really interested that then one of our primary areas is criminal justice reform, because people don't always think about those two things as going hand in hand. But this is really just one of the many, many examples of how our criminal justice system fosters poverty in our communities. And this poverty is really being done on the backs of families who are struggling to generate insane profits for the correctional telecommunications sector, which generated $1.4 billion a year on average over the last few years. So it's just really important that incarcerated folks are able to stay in communication with their loved ones while they're serving their sentences. It's important to remember that there's a huge intersection between mental health and incarceration. Many, many folks who are incarcerated have a pre-existing mental health condition. And even if they don't have a pre-existing mental health condition, many folks who are then isolated in jail or in prison can develop really serious cases of anxiety or depression. And it's really important for them to be able to stay in communication with folks while they're incarcerated. Maintaining connections fosters hope. It encourages good behavior. So, there's actually a lot of support for this sort of amongst folks who work in jails and prisons, because they have found that folks tend to be much more calm. They don't have as many issues with folks sort of acting out, which makes a ton of sense if they're completely cut off from their support network. So it's good not only for the individuals, but also for the broader folks who are working in that system as well. And it also really helps to maintain important familial bonds, especially for parents who are incarcerated and need to be able to stay in touch with their children. Children are often very traumatized by the system. If they have a parent who is incarcerated, maybe they're staying now in a single parent environment. Maybe they've been sent to stay with a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or another trusted person, but still really want to be able to talk to that incarcerated individual, to their parent. And so really, really important for folks to be able to keep good communication, ideally even on a daily basis. And there are lots of studies that show that when folks are detained, if they're able to maintain strong family ties, they have a much easier time transitioning home, and are much more likely to succeed during their reentry, whether that be, just after a few months, if they're being held pre-trial, or really if it is at a longer pace, if they are found guilty of a crime and incarcerated and having to reenter after, say, many years. And that smoother path to reentry not only benefits themselves, but it also benefits their families and their communities. And, I think that there are, of course, going to be a small percentage of folks that say, like, well, if you are in jail, then you did something wrong. And that's just the cost of doing, you do the crime, you do the time. Obviously we don't agree with that sentiment in any situation, but it's especially important to remember that here, in case you would come across that attitude from someone, that, this bill is actually primarily focused on the jails in Missouri, and the majority of folks who are detained in jails and not prisons are being held pre-trial, which means that they do have a presumption of innocence under the law. So we are advocating today on a bill, HB 2299. So what this bill does is it actually codifies a 2021 FCC ruling, which limited the price of interstate prison phone calls to somewhere between 12 cents a minute and 21 cents a minute, depending on the size of the jail or prison. So the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, has the ability to put a cap on the cost of interstate calls, but not intrastate calls. So now what states are doing is going back and saying, okay, we should make sure that we're not somehow charging people more to make calls within the state that is above and beyond what the federal government says that we can charge people to make calls out of the state. And so that is what HB 2299 does. And it's also really important because, this FCC ruling just happened in 2021. The state law will hold even if a future administration makes changes to the FCC rules. It'll ensure that these caps do still stay in place. So the Missouri prison system, the Department of Corrections, was already charging a rate that is lower than the 12 cents per minute that the FCC put the cap on. So that's great news. So this bill is really aimed at putting a cap on our jails and the jails in certain counties who are charging just really outrageous rates for folks to be able to stay in touch with folks. Any questions on HB 2299 or the issue of phone calls from jails and prisons before we move on to our second bill that we're talking about today? Okay, so our second bill that we are talking about today is about the regulation of private probation companies. So I'll be honest and say when this bill got filed this session, private probation was something that I knew very little about. I was vaguely aware that this was a practice that we were using in Missouri, but I did not understand the extent to which this practice is just incredibly unregulated and problematic across the state. So I'm going to start though, there's often a lot of confusion between probation and parole. So I want to start just with a quick primer on that so everyone is clear about what we're talking about. So parole is a conditional release from prison and is overseen by the Department of Corrections. So these are people who have been convicted of a crime, have gone to state prison for that crime, and who might be eligible for a conditional release after they've served a certain percentage of their time in prison. Parole, on the other hand, is ordered by a judge in lieu of prison time or as a suspension of a prison sentence. So they might say, okay, you're going to be on parole for 5 years. And if you complete all of the conditions that we put on your parole, then you will no longer have to go to prison. But if you violate the terms of your probation, then you have a 3-year sentence in prison. So folks who are on probation, which is what we are talking about today, are supervised by the court system. And we won't get into this here for the sake of time, but I can tell you that the court system in Missouri is very crazy and very different county by county. But when you look at the number of people in the state who are under what we call correctional control, so they're either on probation, on parole, or physically incarcerated, more than half of those folks are serving a term of probation. So we're talking about a really large percentage of people that this is affecting. So, when probation originally came about, it was designed as an alternative to prison and a way to provide community-based rehabilitation. But instead, what has happened is that, there are some folks who think like, okay, well, we can just, something that we maybe normally wouldn't have charged as a crime. Now we're going to charge it as a crime, but we won't incarcerate somebody for that because we don't think the public will like that, but we can put them on probation, which has just really, as I said, widened the scope of what is happening in probation and the number of people who are being overseen by some part of the state. So what is currently happening in Missouri when it comes to probation? So under Missouri law, neither the state of Missouri nor any county of the state can be required to pay any part of the cost of probation or rehab services that are provided to misdemeanor offenders. So if you are charged with any sort of misdemeanor and you are put on probation, you yourself as the person who was charged have to pay all of the cost of that. That's never going to be the state or the county. So again, here's why this is something we're really concerned about when it comes to the intersection of poverty and the criminal justice system. And per Missouri law, individuals who have misdemeanors or ordinance violations cannot be supervised by state probation or parole officers. So all of these folks with misdemeanors, which are relatively minor crimes, are going to be supervised by a private probation company. So our team spent a lot of time this spring trying to figure out how widespread is the practice of private probation in Missouri, and found that we are not the first folks to attempt this. We have found a couple of different research studies that have been done on the issue and found that there is no centralized list of providers in Missouri. Every county does their own thing. So you can Google private probation companies and find literally dozens of companies. Some of them work in just one county. Some of them work in a bi-state or tri-state county area. Some of them have offices all over the state. Each county approves their own their own vendors, basically, for supervision. There are no guidelines for the approval of an agency or its staff. Each county completely can make its own decision. There doesn't have to be any kind of training for the staff. There doesn't have to be any kind of certification for the agencies. And there's no oversight structure or appeals process. So if you are assigned to serve probation for a misdemeanor offense, and you are assigned to a private probation company, and you don't like what they are asking you to do, you're out of luck. There's no oversight structure at the state level that you can go to and say, I don't think this is fair. Can someone review this case? It doesn't exist. Under state law, private probation companies can charge up to $60 a month just for supervision. So that doesn't include any of, any other requirements that you might have to do. It's just the base rate for being supervised. And again, the person who's on probation is completely responsible for that cost. And what I think is maybe the most concerning thing about this is that private probation companies are paid by the county for reporting violations. So they are highly incentivized to nitpick and to violate people, as many people as that's supposed to say as possible, because they're paid for every violation that they submit. So whereas at the Department of Corrections, they're more likely to, they want often, in some cases, like want people to succeed. They want people to be able to get out there. Private probation companies don't have that incentive. They are really incentivized, I think you could argue, only by profit. So as I said, all the costs are paid by the individual on probation. People can be required either by the court or by the private probation company to undergo many other different services or programs as a condition of their probation, and folks have to pay for all of those costs as well. So if you are told you have to go to substance abuse treatment, you're paying for it. Anger management classes, you're paying for it. Driving classes, you're paying for it. If you need they say you need a GPS monitor strapped on your ankle, you are paying to rent that device and for the monitoring of it every month. And because the private probation companies can put these things in place without court oversight, we're really concerned about the due process clause of our Constitution about that, especially because these things are being paid for entirely at the expense of the client. And so people get really easily trapped in this sort of endless cycle of probation, because in Missouri, we allow something called pay-only supervision, where if you reach the end of your time on probation for the original thing that you were charged with, but you have not been able to pay all of your fines and fees, they can keep you on pay-only supervision to make sure that you pay off the remaining balance. And while you're being supervised, you still have to keep paying for supervision. And so the cost can really just spiral out of control, and it can really be very detrimental to families. And that's why this is not a super widespread practice. Private probation is only used in 12 states across the country because it is dubious in general. And so there's a ton of issues when it comes to probation in general. Like, longer probation periods are not shown to reduce recidivism. They are shown to increase anxiety and depression. Because there is this huge issue with folks having to pay all of these fines and fees and the cost of supervision, folks are continuing to struggle with poverty throughout. So they can have a lot of trouble attaining work or maintaining work because of requirements of the probation company. They can have restrictions on where they work because of geographic constraints. They might have issues with transportation, so they might not be allowed to drive. And then it's really hard for them, especially in rural communities where there isn't public transportation. And so we really believe that probation conditions should be set by a court and tied to the offense as part of the due process that every one of us deserves under the law. Now, The bill we are advocating for, HB 2248, does not fully get us to where we want to be, but it does take some great steps in the right direction. So this bill reduces the maximum sentence for parole for misdemeanors from 2 years to 18 months, which can save people just a ton of money. We also, as we said, there's no evidence that, this should say, yikes. This should all say probation, not parole. This is why I shouldn't write presentations in the middle of the night. See, I told you probation and parole are easy to mix up, even for somebody that does this work every day. So it reduces the maximum probation sentence for misdemeanors from 2 years to 18 months. It also prohibits private probation companies from subjecting the folks on probation to drug or alcohol testing unless they're on probation for a drug and alcohol related offense. So if your misdemeanor is petty theft and has nothing to do with drugs or alcohol, you weren't intoxicated when it happened, you didn't plead during your case that it's because you were struggling with addiction that you stole something, they can still require you to participate in drug and alcohol testing. These tests often cost $15 to $20 each, and private probation companies can require you to participate in that 2 or 3 times a week. You can be called randomly any day of the week except for Sunday and be required to provide a sample in a 3-hour window, which means that folks, might be at work. They might have been picking up a last minute shift that their probation officer didn't know about. So it's really, really detrimental that folks can be required to participate in this process if their crime did not have anything to do with drugs or alcohol. And so we really love that this bill says that you cannot do that if the offense is not related. Any questions on HB 2248 or the issue of private probation?
Who is it? Is it the state that determines which private probation company is going to be utilized for individuals?
Every county can choose their own list of companies they want to work with.
So they're just randomly selected?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a bigger problem than the scope of what we're going to do in 2248, but we still think that 2248 is a really good step in the right direction. All right, so as promised, we have 12 minutes left. I went just a tad over my mark, about 3 minutes over, but still hope that you will take the time in these last couple of minutes to reach out to your legislators about HB 2299 and HB 2248. If you do not know who your state representative is, or your state senator is, you can go to this website right here, which I am hoping that one of my colleagues will also drop in the chat for you, to the legislator lookup page. You just enter your address and they will tell you exactly who your legislators are. And then we went ahead, and I'm also going to drop the link for this presentation in the chat so that you can scroll back through slides on your own time as you're sort of reaching out to folks. So the second step is to determine your outreach method. So do you want to send an email? Do you want to make a phone call? Do you want to reach out to the person on social media? If you're coming with us tomorrow to Jeff City, maybe you just want to take the time right now to make your outline because you know you're going to meet with them in person tomorrow. And then you can use our messaging as the beginning. So my representative is Steve Butts. So this is the email that I put together for him. So where we are at with these bills is they have both been heard and passed out of their initial committee hearings, but they have a procedural barrier that they have to leap in the House before they can make it to the House floor. So you can see this at the end here. Both of these bills are waiting for rules hearings. And so that is what we are asking for folks to, we want them to know that they're waiting for rules hearings so that they can reach out to their colleagues on the rules committee and get those hearings scheduled ASAP so that they have a hope of having floor debate this session. So like I said, I am going to share, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. So that I can drop the link to this presentation to you so that you can scroll back through and get all the information you need. We're gonna stay on the line here. So if folks have additional questions or about the presentation, or if you want to come back and tell us how your conversation went, we're more than happy to have that. And so I am gonna drop this link. And we'll hang out. So that's the end of our formal presentation. I hope that we will see you either tomorrow in person or at our virtual sessions on Wednesday and Thursday. You can expect a very similar layout to this on Wednesday and Thursday. And thanks so much for joining us for Week of Action. Like I said, I'm going to stay tuned for questions, and I hope that your outreach goes really well. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Mallory, it's Cheryl Edelstein.
Hey, Cheryl.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. So I see that they're both in rules, and I had a great conversation with Ian Mackey a few weeks ago, who's a minority member of rules.
Yeah.
And he said that you can actually lobby or advocate with the rules committee members about what they should take up. And I didn't know whether that was part of the strategy tomorrow, if you're going to send folks to the various people on the rules committee.
It is. Yeah.
Great.
That is exactly what we're doing tomorrow. Yeah. Today we would just have people reach out to their legislators, but tomorrow with the targets, we're going to have people, meet with the rules committee members too, because not only are these bills waiting for a rules committee hearing, but so is the bill that we're advocating on for affordable housing.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yay.
Yay.
That was new information. It was like, I hadn't really understood that. And Ian was like, yeah, we actually can stop things from moving and we can move things. I'm like, good to know. Didn't know that. So.
Yeah, I had a really good conversation last week with Representative Davis, Michael Davis. He's the sponsor of 2299, the phone cap bill. And that's what he said. He was like, because the committee chair is Eggleston. And he was like, I keep reaching out to Eggleston. I was like, well, we're gonna reach out to Eggleston too, see if we can get you a little bit of help.
I just wanted to add something real quick. Mallory, I was trying to send you that text, but I wanted to say excellent information today in prepping us advocates for tomorrow, for what's to come. So I wanted to just kind of offer my old seasoned advocacy self to some of those sitting on the fence kind of legislators, some of those that we need to just get them to realize these are some old crappy bills. I'm kind of sorry we're going to spend so much energy trying to clean up such awful, rotten stuff when we've got some great new stuff. And I'm really hoping, that we can get boots on the ground for expungement. But we are coming tomorrow wanting to be ready to speak with those that just need a little bit of convincing that, these bills either need to be passed, we need to clean up, this private prison stuff and all of that. So I want to thank everybody on the call, and especially Empower Missouri for just bringing it all together in like that 30-second elevator speech of what we need to do to get people in decision-making positions to see what we're dealing with. And some of them are dealing with some of this too. Some of them got hands in the pot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, Oh, we need better conflict of interest laws at the state level for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you were here today, Bev, and can't wait to see you tomorrow.
I look forward. All right. Well, thank you for everything. I'm going to go back and mute and listen a few minutes and on with my day.
All right. Sounds good. See you tomorrow.
All right.
Question.
Yes.
This is Kyra coming from Kansas City. Where's the best place for parking now? What do you recommend is best place for parking?
Yeah, so whenever I go, I mean, I always start with the Capitol grounds themselves because there is some parking there. So I always do a couple loops around the building to see if I can sort of snag a spot. And then there is a lot of metered parking in about a 2-block radius around the building. The thing that you have to remember about the metered parking, though, is that their meters only take quarters. And so a lot of folks now are used to the meters in the bigger cities that will let you pay, or there's an app where you can pay with a credit card. Can't pay with a credit card. So bring your quarters. I will say that a quarter buys you like half an hour on a meter, which is way better than you can do in St. Louis for sure. But yeah, kind of looking for that metered parking. And then I believe there's a final email going out today, a final logistics email. And there also is a parking garage that they are listing as a backup. I don't usually park in that garage, so I don't know exactly where it is, but that information should be in the email that's going out.
Okay. Oh, so there was an email that went out at 12:30. So I check your inbox to see if you got that. And then if you didn't get it, you can email me at nashell@empowermissouri.org.
Obviously, I was not checking my email during the call.
I'm glad you weren't. I feel like you probably had something else to do.
My fabulous team already sent the email out, of course.